This is Joel, and in this video we will talk about Cisco ISE profiling, right? So you would have heard about this amazing capability of Cisco ISE, which basically helps to kind of classify devices, right, or classify endpoints. And we'll look into how ISE actually does that. Now, again, the very same format. We'll talk a little bit about theory and then try to build a lab around it. The topology is pretty straightforward. I have an ISE, I have a domain controller with my whole DNS, AD, CA, everything inside this. The switch is here and I have one client for testing, right? That being said, let's probably go down to my whiteboard just to put in some basic stuff just to get you guys, started around this. Now, something which I really like talking here before we get down to business is what is the final goal, right? Why do we even want the profiler service, right? So the why part, I would say the first reason is to kind of have or maintain, an inventory, right? So maintain a very, because when you have a big network, right, it's really, and you know that there are going to be a lot of clients connected to your network. Wouldn't it be amazing if you can kind of like build an inventory around it, right? If you're able to get some analytics around who are connecting to a network, what kind of devices are connecting to a network, that would be really good. So that's point number one. The second, I would say, benefit of doing profiling is that, this is actually the more important one, I would say, is that so that you can build your authentication policies and authorization policies, around this, right? Your authentication and your authorization policy. We have seen these a bunch of times in our previous videos, but can you think of a world where you can kind of profile a device, right? Maybe you can profile a device as, say, something like an iPad, right? And if you can deliver the authorization policies based on that information, right? Based on the information, right? Till now, remember what we were doing? We were using we were connecting our clients using .1x map, and then based on that information we were then providing the authorization policies. But what if you don't want the users to do .1x or map just by using but just by understanding what kind of a client it is, right? If you could influence the authorization, right, policies for that device, wouldn't that be amazing? So that's the final goal, right? To use all this information which is profiled, right, and then kind of like use it in your authorization policies to finally drive some change in the network, right? So that's the why part. Now the elements, right? So logically speaking, right, this is how it works. So you have your that, right? So you have your devices, right? Your NAD, right? We have talked about NAD before. Now the NAD could be a switch, it could be probably a WLC, it could be different devices, right? So all these devices will basically, and you also will have your endpoints which are basically connected to these guys, right? Now the NADs are generally configured to send some information up to the ISE, right? So this information, right, is sent to the ISE, and on ISE, though ISE is one single node, in fact the PSN node, right, the services node, right, we have talked about PAN, MNT and PSN, so I'm mainly talking about PSN, right? So logically you can break this into two. One is the sensor node, and similarly the other piece of ISE, you can call it as a analyzer. This is just a logical segregation. There is nothing like a separate physical appliance for this, right? It's the same PSN node, in fact. It's just the analyzer, it's just the sensor and analyzer which is kind of like doing the job for you, right? So so what happens is all the information, I'll tell you what kind of information, but for a minute just assume that you have some kind of information which is pushed by your NADs, right, up to your ISE, right? In fact the sensor logical part of it, and this one communicates to your analyzer, and then output of this would be basically your classification, right? Classification, and that basically leading to the second part, which is the endpoint identity groups or endpoint profiling, right? So this is the whole workflow. So you have your devices here, your NATs, they try to look at the clients, and whatever information they get from the clients, they send it upwards to the ICE. Then there is a bit of analysis done, right, in your analyzer, where all the policies and all of that will kick in, and the final outcome of that is, the ICE is now able to classify. It is able to tell that, okay, these devices belong to this group, right? And the final outcome you get to see, right, something tangible for you, is that endpoint identity group. So it will now profile a device. Let's say if there was an iPad over here or a PC, now you will basically see it over here, right, in that particular group, right? You will see the iPad here. You'll probably have one more group for Windows PCs and so on. So that's the whole workflow, right? So those are the two important components, right? The sensor and the analyzer. Now we'll talk a little bit about this data which is getting pushed upwards, right? So in simple terms, actually they are actually called as probes, right? That information what we are pushing here, they are called as nothing but probes, right? So probes, a probe, you can think of it, it's a method, right, with which you use, right, which you use to collect an attribute, right, or a set of attributes from an endpoint on your network, right? So there are a lot of probes, ICE uses, right? We'll probably not go deeper into all the probes, but to name a few, there are probes like DHCP, there is a radius probe, you will find Nmap, right, probes, there is SNMP probes, obviously very common, Active Directory probes. So there are like lots. I've just listed a bunch of them. In fact, these are the ones which are enabled by default, but there are quite more like HTTP and so on, right? So the probe allows you to kind of create or kind of update the endpoints with their matched profile, right, in the database by analyzing the device behavior, right? So you enable these probes on the ICE, and what happens is and obviously there'll be a little bit of configuration which will go on your NAT as well, right? So now what happens is the NATs, based on the configuration, they'll be sending this information. Like for example in radius, right, the information will be sent as your attributes, right? You have a lot of radius attributes which are exchanged between the authenticator and the authentication server, generally in a .1x, imagine, right? So this small details, right, about the client, right, about the endpoint, in fact, what kind of an IP address it has, what kind of a MAC address does it have, right, which port it is talking to me on, and stuff like that. So all of this information is kind of like shared upwards towards the ICE, and the ICE, like I said, is able to then put all this information together and figure out what kind of a device this could be, right? So that's around probes and how the data is basically pushed upwards. So these are some of the default probes. Now we talked about how the data is coming up to the ICE, but how does ICE know that when I see the data corresponding from a particular probe, how is the ICE able to understand that device is a, say, iPad, right? So with respect to that, we have something called as a profiling policy, right? So let me just reduce the size of this. Yep, that's good. So what we have is, along with this probes, the other interesting piece to remember here is the profiling, policy, right? So the profiling policy, just to reiterate, probe is basically a method, right, to collect attributes from a connected endpoint. This is just a method to collect the data upwards, right? And attributes are used via a profiling policy, right, to find a matching profile, right? So hope you get the connection. You have probes, right? You have probe over here, then you have the attributes, right, which is nothing but are processed by whom? By a profiling policy. So in the profiling policy, think of, let's take an example to make it simpler, right? So let's say if you want to define a profiling policy for an iPad, you want your ICE to like identify iPad, right, an Apple iPad. How do you do it? It's pretty simple. The DHCP host name, right, you can write a policy to see that you can write a profiling policy to check that the DHCP host name, right, because DHCP messages are exchanged throughout. I mean, you will find DHCP to be a very common source of a very common probe, right, because most of the devices in our networks are using DHCP to get IP addresses. So you can use the information coming in from the DHCP probe, right, to get what? To get the DHCP host name. So you can write a policy here saying, if the DHCP host name contains the word iPad, because it's not compulsory that a device using DHCP should have the word iPad here, but it is very common, isn't it? No one is going to change the host name of an iPad. So generally this is a very common thing. So you can use this as one of the condition. The DHCP host name could be could have the term iPad or a string iPad in it, so you can use that as the logic, right? And also probably you can use one more, which is around probably an HTTP probe, right? So there will be a lot of let me write down that as well. So there will be a lot of HTTP message, because people on an iPad, they are bound to be using, they'll be surfing the internet, right? So there will be a lot of HTTP requests and responses flowing around. So in fact, one specific probe, one specific attribute in HTTP response is actually called as user agent, right? You would have seen this before in a browser and stuff. So this user agent also generally has the term iPad, right? So you can use such kind of conditions. So now what you can do is you can kind of like, if you have more conditions, you can keep on writing them, but if I'm happy with these both, I can put a weightage, right? So you can put a weightage, and that weightage is generally in terms of ICE, it is called as certainty factor, right? So I can say that every time a condition is matched, I want to increase the certainty factor by say 20, right? And if this also matches, it increases by 20. So I can put a condition saying that for this policy to be successful, the total certainty factor should be 40, right? So what happens is, when maybe you have, this is just 1, 2, maybe you have 3, 4, 5, 6 conditions. So you are basically creating a policy saying any of the 2 conditions match, it basically means that it's an iPad. So profile that device as an iPad. So that's the algorithm and stuff which goes in the background. I just wanted to tell you guys how it works in the background, right? So that's around the profiling policy. So we talked about probe, we talked about attributes, we talked about the various types of probes, right? And we also talked about the profiling policy, which can be used to profile devices. Now this is Cisco already has like hundreds of profiling policies which has been built already by Cisco and probably by other engineers worldwide, right? And it's all put in a database. So when you install ICE for the first time, you will get close to 500 plus profiling policies out there, right? Which means ICE itself has intelligence built in to identify like 500 plus types of devices. But if you are not happy with it, or maybe if you want to create your own, right, you also have an option to do that, right? You can use the custom policy creation, and you can go and create those as well. So if you have say a new device like a IoT device which has not been profiled by Cisco, or the vendor has not been profiled by Cisco, then you can write your own policy too. Cool. So that's around that. Now to finally tie this down to how this is really helping me with my authorization, right? Because that is my final goal, right? We talked about in the why part over here, right? We talked about why are we even doing this? Why are we profiling the devices? One is to have a visibility into your inventory, right? What kind of devices are coming into your network? The other part is obviously to use this information somehow, right? To use that information that a user has connected using iPad, and then kind of like deliver a specific authorization policy based on that, right? So that is your final goal, right? So for that, we just do this. Yeah, so that's your final goal, right? So before we get to that part, there is one small another piece which you, like a term which you gotta remember is that logical profile. So think of this logical profile as a bridge, right, which is connecting your profiling policy with what? Your authorization policy, which we will finally be using in our ICE, right? We have done this quite some time, right? So this guy, right, the one who is sitting here, the logical profile is the one which is kind of like connecting the profiling policy to the authorization policy, right? So what we do is, in simple terms, right, we create an authorization profile, right, and we say that, okay, this authorization profile is going to have, let's say, Windows, Windows tablets, right, or Apple tablets, right, or an iPad or mobile devices, whatever. So we create a logical profile and we put the endpoint identities groups, right, or basically the profiles which has been profiled by your network, right. So we basically group them together, right. You can just put one as well, right, or you can have multiple. So once we create this logical profile, you can then use that logical profile inside your authorization policy. As simple as that. Instead of directly using the profiling policy here, what we do is logical profile is like a bridge. Think of it as a bridge which is helping you to kind of like use that profiling policy intelligence in your authorization policy to deliver some kind of authorization for your network, right. So that's basically that. And obviously whenever you're talking about authorization, you always have to talk about COA, right, change of authorization. So imagine if your device or client was already authorized into your network, right, using some other authorization policy, and after some time, maybe after 1 hour or maybe after 2 hours, ICE profiled this device into something else, right. Probably imagine initially the device got the permissions of a let's say as a general device, right. Imagine ICE thought that this is a general device which is coming into my network, right, and after probably a few minutes or an hour, the ICE got all the information from all the probes, and now it understood that this device is not a general type of a device, rather it is an iPad. So now it can use COA to kind of go and make the device go and do a reauth, and that way the ICE can push the new authorization policy onto the device, right. So COA is not something new, we have discussed it quite some time, but this is how you will actually be using it. All right, so I'll stop boring you with the theory part, and let's move on to the fun part, right, which is basically testing some of these things in our lab. All right, so the only problem here is I would really suggest, if you have access to real devices, do try this over there, real hardware, because especially with respect to endpoints, really I really don't have much option here. I can only have a PC, right, as an endpoint. I can't put a mobile phone, I can't put an IP phone, I can't put an iPad here, but that's why if you want to really understand profiling the whole end-to-end and look at how intelligent ICE is, I would suggest you to test this in a real lab with with real hardware, right. That being said, let's not waste much time. Give me a second. All right, so let's go down and check out some of the menus. So you basically find profiler under, so what have we checked till now? So I think we have already played around a little bit with network access, we have done guest access, we have done TrustSec. Now we are checking out the profiler. The first page you can check this, or the first page which you can land here is the profiler overview. It gives you like a step-by-step way to go about it. If you are stuck at some point, you can come here and get to do some of this stuff. But apart from that, the other thing which I want to introduce you here is that the endpoint visibility, right. Hope this opens up. I have it here. Okay, so yeah, so this is the endpoint visibility, right, which is very important when you are doing anything with respect to what? With respect to profiling, because this is the page where you get all your endpoints listed, and you have an option to kind of do all kinds of filtering here, right. You can use filters, you can use this option to kind of hide certain columns and so on. My network is very small, so you see it doesn't have a lot of information around here, but probably we can pick one of these. Hope this loads here. This is fine. Okay, so you see this is my domain controller actually in my topology, and it has actually kind of like tried to map this particular device, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to understand what type of a device this is, right. It is currently profiling it to be a unknown device, right. That reason could be because all of these devices are running on Eve, right. So there is always an issue with the kind of probes, limitation with respect to probes and so on. But generally if a device is profiled, right, the endpoint profile would basically appear here. You can actually see here one of the device has been profiled, the switch one. I think this is the switch one, and it has profiled it to be a Cisco device, right? So but maybe we'll check this out later at the final part of our demo, that we should see some cool stuff here. So that being said, the first thing which I would suggest you guys to enable, turn on is obviously the profiling service. And where do you do that? You can do that down here. We can probably go back to that ORU page. Let's see, do we have the ORU page here? Yeah. So on the ORU page, you have the deployment button here, or a link, right? So click on that and it will take you to that deployment, the node configs, right? And this is my node, it's a standalone node. So here you have an option called enable profiling service, right? So in my case, I've already turned this on, but if this is not turned on, you will have to turn it on. And once you turn that on, you will see an extra tab here for profiling configuration. So here, these are all the profiles, these are all the probes which you can configure. And different probes do different jobs, right? This is probably, it's gonna take like an hour-long session to even explain every single probe, how it operates, what information it collects. So I would suggest you to check that out in the documentation. But as a quick overview, I think they have given some of the stuff here, right? What DHCP does, what Radius does, right? It is giving you information about CDP, LLDP, and all of that, right? So device sensor and stuff like that. So there's SNMP as well, DNS and AD and stuff like that. So you can turn on the stuff which you want based on your use case. There are a bunch of them which are enabled by default, and you can enable anything apart from that as well. I think I enabled HTTP later on, so that's enabled over there. So that being said, the other stuff which I probably want to show you under this is, let's see. So the other stuff is very interesting, which I find is the profile, the feed service. Okay, let's see the feed service. So the feed service, right? So where does ICE get all this information, right? Or where does the ICE intelligence come? Where does it come from? It's obviously coming in from the Cisco's database, right? So all these policies which are already pre-built, cooked into ICE, right? They are coming in from a Cisco's database, and you can always click on the update now button to get the latest ones, right? Download the latest policies, right? Or download the latest feeds, right? Or you can also, by default, it will be set at like 1 a.m. I believe, right? Every day it will go and try to download and update the cache with the latest ones. You can do that. And you can also probably put a notify administrator when the download occurs, right? You can put in the email address here, and you'll basically get an email when the upload is happening, right? I have seen sometimes this upload would take a lot of time, so I'm not basically going to go and click the upload button, in which case I'll not be able to continue with the demo here. But you're free to, if you have some time, probably after you test out everything, just click on this button and wait for probably a few minutes, and I think it should get the latest ones. You also have an option to, if you have an on-prem kind of a ICE, right, and if you really don't want you don't have any connectivity to the internet, then you can also download that file, right? You get the option or button, the link here to download the profile policies. You can download it and you can upload as well. That way you will have the latest ones. All right, cool. The next is so that's mainly around, I think there's nothing much of a configuration from a profiler perspective, right? It's pretty straightforward. I'll talk a little bit about policies, but before that, let's move on to the NAD configuration, or the network device configuration. What happens over there? Now the NAD configuration, pretty straightforward. NADs, like I said, it could be anything. It could be a switch, it could be a WLC and stuff like that, right? In our case, like, we don't have anything wireless, so I have just a wired device here. And you can see these are some of the places where you can turn on some of the profiling parameters. Like radius is, I would say 99% of the time people enable radius for a NAD, so that's fine. SNMP, so you can see that I have enabled SNMP, right? I put in a password as well. I think it is something like Cisco 123 if I'm not wrong. I think, yeah, it's not showing for some reason, but yeah, I've put in the read-only community. I'm using 2C, so which means I don't have to put in any of these parameters. You also have an option to change the polling interval, right? So when the SNMP traps or SNMP requests are basically sent, right, ICE basically uses this interval. You can change this and stuff like. I think I've configured it to be for every 10 minutes. And if you want some link trap queries or MAC address changes to be reported back to ICE, you can enable all of that. So that's mainly from the NAD perspective. The other stuff is probably let's see. So under work centers, we should let's see the settings part, right? Because that is also kind of related to your NAD. So let me just take a minute to explain that. So the change of authorization, that's very important, right? I talked about that. So you have a button here, or you have a switch, on-off switch, to kind of tell ICE to do a change of authorization when it okay, that did not go where I wanted. I can click on this. Yeah, so you have a like I was saying, you have a button here, right, or an on-off switch, which basically tells that when the ICE is able to, or when the ICE profiles a device into something different, right, from the older profile, you are basically enabling COA, which means now the ICE has this capability to go and kind of like do a reauth, right, of the endpoint. That way, the endpoint can be pushed with the latest authorization policies, conforming to that particular profile, right? So you have the option here. You have an option to not only do reauth, but you can do a port bounce and obviously no COA. If you don't want that COA, you can select that. Port bounce is not preferred if you have like multiple sessions, obviously, right? Multiple sessions on a switch, then everything will get port bound, so you don't want that. So reauth is the best if you have multiple sessions running on a particular port. And these are a bunch of things, right? Like in my case, I have enabled let's see, can I see this? I have enabled so yeah, Cisco 123 is my community string, which I've configured. I've showed you before as well on my. I'll show that I've configured that same thing on my switch as well. But this is the SNMP community strings, right, which which ICE can basically use to connect via SNMP to my network, to my device, in fact. Apart from that, what else? Let's also look into the policy elements here. Right, so the policy element, something which I want to show you is let's see, where is that? Policy actions, maybe. Yeah, so sorry, exception actions. So this is pretty cool. Now let's click on one of these guys, which is first time profile, right? So you can see this is a very interesting checkbox to have, where we are telling when the endpoint gets profiled first time, right? So always a device, when ICE is not able to profile a particular device, it will be put in under unknown, and when it moves from unknown to like a particular profile, right, that's basically called as a first time profile event, right? And when that first time profile event happens, you can see that I have enabled force COA. So which means basically I'm telling ICE that whenever you are able to figure out that a client is no longer unknown, it is probably an iPad or it's a Microsoft Windows PC, go and do a COA, so that the corresponding authorization policy will kick in. Cool. So now let's actually go down to my switch here. I think I should have a switch. Let's see, where is that? So there's a switch here. Let me just show you a little bit of a straightforward SNMP configurations. I mean, I really don't have to show this because this is pretty straightforward. You would have done this 100 times, but let me just show you show run section SNMP server, probably. There we go. A little bit of SNMP stuff. I think I have basically enabled all the traps, but you really don't have to do that. Things like SNMP server, community RO, right, the read-only community, the SNMP trap source VLAN, source interface, right, and then these are the traps which I've enabled, and I think I clicked the enter button, and that way everything got enabled, right? You can see traps. Most of other traps are also enabled. Apart from that, yeah, and I have also configured, you can see SNMP, my ICE has the SNMP server as well, right? So that is there. And what else? I think I've also, you can do this one. So the other trap which you can, or the other probe which you can enable, like I was saying, is the DHCP, right? So you can see my DHCP. What I've done is, sorry, let's see under the section interface probably. Yeah, let's see, where is interface VLAN. There you go. So what I've done is, this is my SVI, right? This is actually my SVI for VLAN 32. This is the VLAN onto which the client connects. So what I've done is, I have put a IP helper address for the actual DHCP server, which is the switch itself in this case. But I've also put another IP helper address for my ICE. So now the DHCP request, right, will also be sent to this second guy. So that way the ICE will understand more, or will get more visibility into the DHCP information coming out of the client, which will then be very useful for the ICE to profile this device in a better way. So like that, you can you can enable bunch of things on your switch to cater to your probes, right? I have done just couple, but you can do with respect to device sensor and a lot of other stuff as well. All right, what else? Now I think this is pretty good. So let's dwell into the last part. Okay, so for that, let's go down to the profiling policies. So under profiling policies, this is basically what I was telling, right? So you have a lot of policies which you get by default, right? When you install ICE, right, for the first time, like for example, let's click on one of these guys, Android Google, right? I think it's trying to figure out if it's an Android device, right? And you can see this is what I was talking about, the certainty factor, right? So they have written a rule saying that if this condition matches, then the certainty factor increases by 40, and if this rule matches, then the condition increases by another 40. And they have mentioned a condition here saying that minimum certainty factor for this rule to be processed is that it should be 40. So one of these conditions, when it matches, ICE will immediately profile that device to be a Android device, right? So similarly, you have a plus button here. You are free to go and click on this plus and kind of create your own policies catering to your unique devices, right? If you find that there is no corresponding policy in this huge list for your device, then you can create your own policy using the logic behind it. Now once you are done with the profiling policy, remember from my explanation here, we were talking about profiling policy. Then I told you that logical profile is kind of like the bridge which connects this with your authorization policy, right? So that is what you see here. So under logical profiles, I think you get a bunch of them by default, like infrastructure, network devices, and so on. I have created one called as testing logical policy, a very dumb name, but yeah, I just created one just to test bunch of things. So what I've done is I've created this testing, this a logical profile, and you can see on the right hand side I have assigned 3 policies to it, right? I have assigned a Microsoft workstation, Windows 7 workstation, and workstation, right? So I've assigned 3 guys to this logical profile. Now in my authorization policy, I can basically use this logical profile, right? I'll show you how to do that. Pretty straightforward again. So if I go to my policy sets, right? So if you go to my policy set, you will basically see that this is pretty straightforward, right? It's a wired connection. The authentication policy, nothing has changed since the previous one, right? I'm still doing map here, right? And there's map, .1x, everything enabled, but I think I'm doing map in this particular example now. And you can see here the authorization policy. Just for your convenience, what I've done is, just to show you how all of this works nicely, I've created 2 authorization policy. One is called before profiling and other one is called after profiling. So we'll get to see this beautifully on the logs, right? So that's why I've created this. So this is what will happen now. As I enable my client, right, the client basically comes in here. It's a wired client, so it comes inside this condition and it looks at the authentication policy. And looking at the authentication policy, the map policy kicks in, right? Because this particular, the MAC address of that particular, endpoint, I've kind of like added it to the list here. Let's look at the list here, right? Let's refresh this. Yeah, so you can see this. This will be the MAC address of that endpoint, and I've added it to the list, but I've not added any endpoint profile, right? It's currently unknown, which means I really don't know what kind of a device this is. So it's a blind device coming into my network, and the map is enabled, right? Because of which the authentication succeeds. Once the authentication succeeds, it comes down and looks for a corresponding authorization policy. The one which matches very closely is the second one, which is the before profiling one. So it matches this, and because of the DACL domain, right, because of this particular authorization rule or profile, the device will now get access to the network, but obviously it will have limited access because of this particular authorization profile. But it will take few seconds, right? During these few seconds, ICE will try to gather as much as information from the endpoint, and once it realizes that the device is not unknown, it is actually it's actually a device belonging to the logical profile, which I showed you, right? Logical profile had Windows 7 machines and stuff like that. And since I'm connecting from a Windows 7 machine, the ICE will be able to successfully profile it, and you will see that within few seconds the COA will be issued by ICE, and my authorization policy changes from this one. In fact, it will changes from before profiling to after profiling. You will see that happen on the ICE, right? So let's test that. So where are we here? Okay, so let's go down to my okay, so this one I wanted to show you guys. See, I have not pre-profiled it. It is showing as unknown. Sorry, yeah, unknown. So now I can just refresh this so that we see the latest logs, and let's go back to my switch. Let's see if everything is good. Show IP interface brief. Yep, that looks good. So now let's go and enable this one, and we should see some radius flowing around. There you go. It's trying to authenticate, I believe. So let's do show auth sessions, interface Ethernet 1/0 details, right? So something has happened. Let's see, show auth sessions. I see map has gone in. Let's see what has happened on our ICE now. Let's refresh this. All right, there you go. So now it's currently stuck at before profiling, right? Because ICE hasn't yet got the information of what kind of a client it is. So it takes few seconds, right? Now you see, I think I have got a COA, right? So now if I refresh this, maybe the authorization policy should have changed. Yeah, there you go. You can see it took few seconds. It was stuck at before profiling. Then few packets went in, right? Because once you enable that port, the client will be able to send some packets towards the NAD, and NAD can use that information and send it up to the ICE, and ICE can use this information now to profile the device from an unknown device to Microsoft Workstation, right? And because it is able to profile into this, the corresponding authorization policy kicks in, because we have COA enabled, and you can see now the corresponding authorization policy is nothing but after profiling, right? I've just kept it very rudimentary here, just so that it's very easy to understand. So it's before profiling here, but after it got profiled, a COA was issued, and the device got associated with a new authorization policy, which is after profiling, right? We can also see this by clicking on this, right? Clicking on the endpoint, you will get to see a lot of information, like for example, wait for a second, right? So here you get to see all the information about this particular client. So I can click on attributes, and you can see there are quite a lot of attributes or information which ICE gathered about this particular device, and that's mainly because of all the probes which I had entered, right? We can do a Control F for that logical profile which we created, and we could see if, my bad, let's do a Control F for logical. Yeah, there you go. So okay, there you go. So you see the logical profile which we created, and which is called testing logical policy, and you can see this particular client got associated with it, right? Because this client actually matched the profile for that particular logical profile. So because this logical profile was matched, that is the reason the second authorization policy kicked in, right? And that's why you saw that cool stuff happen here, where it moved from before profiling to after profiling, right? So hope that was clear, guys. So the main intention of this video was to show the power of profiling, and obviously this is I mean, you actually get to see the power even better if you have a lot of variety of endpoints. which is only possible in a real network or real lab, right, with the physical hardware. But the whole idea to show here is how the whole profiling works, the various components of it, how you can what are the main, why do we even want profiling, right, and how you can use this profiling policies in your authorization policies, right, so that ICE can use this information, this intelligence which which profiling brings in, right. So ICE can use this to kind of issue COA, to kind of dynamically change the authorization policy using COA and issue a reauth to your devices, right. Hope that was useful, guys. So thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye.